Nathaniel Price had always been a man of meticulous planning and relentless pursuit when it came to achieving his goals. Music was his lifeblood, his passion, the very air he breathed. He'd spent years honing his craft, writing songs that poured from his soul, and dreaming of a dedicated space where he could unleash his creativity without compromise. His cramped apartment had been a constant source of frustration. Thin walls, noise complaints, and the ever-present anxiety of disturbing his neighbors had stifled his artistic spirit. That was why finding this house, the two-story Craftsman, with the wraparound porch, the finished basement, and the palpable sense of history clinging to its weathered shingles, felt like destiny. It was more than just a house. It was the sanctuary he'd been yearning for, the blank canvas upon which he could finally paint his sonic masterpiece. The foreclosure auction had been nerve-wracking. He'd saved every penny, meticulously researched the property, and prepared himself for a bidding war. But Lady Luck seemed to be on his side that day. The bidding was less aggressive than he'd anticipated, and with a final, decisive bid, he secured the house that would finally allow him to bring his musical visions to life. The paperwork was signed, the deed transferred, the locks changed. He was now, unequivocally, the legal owner of 14 Maplewood Lane. He spent the next few weeks buzzing with excitement, sketching out plans for his dream studio in the basement, buying soundproofing materials, and envisioning the first note he would play in his new space. The move-in date was set for a Wednesday, and he'd enlisted the help of his cousin, a burly and reliable guy named Marcus, to handle the heavy lifting. Nathaniel envisioned a weekend of unpacking, setting up, and celebrating his newfound freedom. He'd even bought a new couch specifically for the living room, one that was comfortable enough for long writing sessions and stylish enough to impress potential collaborators. He had been so excited about this new chapter in his life. The reality, however, was a jarring symphony of dissonance. As Nathaniel pulled up to the house that Wednesday morning, the U-Haul lumbering behind him, a sense of unease prickled at the back of his neck. The house, bathed in the soft morning light, looked idyllic, but something felt off. Maybe it was the unfamiliarity, the lingering echoes of the previous owners. He shrugged it off, attributing his anxiety to the pressure of finally realizing his long-held dream. Marcus hopped out of the U-Haul, a wide grin on his face. "All right, Nate, let's get this show on the road." Nathaniel returned the smile, grabbed his keys, and approached the front door. This was it. This was the moment he'd been working towards. He unlocked the door, pushed it open, and stepped inside, his heart pounding with anticipation. The scene that greeted him was so surreal, so utterly incongruous with his expectations, that for a moment he was convinced he'd entered the wrong house. And then he saw her. There she sat, sprawled on his brand-new couch, a coffee mug cradled in her hands, her feet propped up on his newly purchased ottoman. A half-eaten donut sat precariously on the coffee table. The woman, who looked to be in her mid-50s, was dressed in a faded floral bathrobe, her hair a chaotic mess of gray and brown. The television, which he hadn't even plugged in yet, flickered with the bright colors of a daytime soap opera. She didn't even acknowledge his presence at first, lost in the melodramatic world unfolding on the screen. Nathaniel froze, his mind reeling. He was certain she was mistaking the house for her own, or perhaps a confused relative of the previous owners. "Excuse me," he stammered, his voice laced with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "I think you might be in the wrong place." The woman slowly turned her head, her eyes locking onto his. Her gaze was cold, dismissive, and utterly devoid of apology. "You're the one who's in the wrong place," she said, her voice raspy. "This is my home, and you're trespassing." Nathaniel, still reeling from the sheer audacity of the woman's claim, struggled to regain his composure. He had anticipated challenges in renovating the house, perhaps even dealing with minor repairs or unexpected expenses, but he never, in his wildest dreams, imagined that he would have to confront a brazen squatter who believed she had more right to his property than he did. He took a deep breath, reminding himself to remain calm and rational. "Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, carefully choosing his words. "This is my house. I bought it a couple of months ago at a foreclosure auction. I have the deed right here." He reached into his bag and pulled out the official document, unfolding it and presenting it to her. She didn't even glance at it. That's a fake, she scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. You were scammed. I've been living here peacefully for weeks, exercising my rights under common law possession. Nathaniel stared at her in disbelief. Common law possession? Was she serious? He knew enough about real estate law to understand that squatters' rights were a complex and often misunderstood issue, but he was certain that they didn't supersede a legally executed deed. He pulled out his driver's license, his closing documents, even a copy of the tax records, all bearing his name and the address of 14 Maplewood Lane. He laid them out on the coffee table, hoping to overwhelm her with the sheer weight of evidence. Look, I understand that you might be confused, but these documents clearly show that I am the rightful owner of this property, he pleaded, his voice rising slightly in frustration. I bought it legally, I paid for it, and I have the right to be here. She didn't even bother to look at the documents, her eyes fixed on the blaring television screen. Those are just pieces of paper, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. They don't mean anything. I have a spiritual connection to this house. I've invested my emotions, my energy, my very soul into this place. I inherited it spiritually. Nathaniel's jaw dropped. Spiritual inheritance? He'd heard it all now. He struggled to process the sheer absurdity of her claims. Spiritual inheritance? He repeated, his voice laced with incredulity. What are you talking about? She sighed, dramatically, as if dealing with an imbecile. This house called to me, she explained, her eyes gleaming with an almost unsettling intensity. I felt its energy, its history. I knew I was meant to be here. I moved in after it was foreclosed and sat empty for 2 months, seeking sanctuary, and giving it the love and attention it deserved. Nathaniel felt a surge of anger building within him. He had followed all the proper legal channels, paid good money for this house, and now he was being told that his legal rights were meaningless because some woman felt a spiritual connection to his property. He could feel frustration rising in his chest. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. Ma'am, with all due respect, you're trespassing, he said, his voice firm but controlled. I'm the owner of this house, and I'm asking you to leave. She narrowed her eyes, her face hardening with defiance. I'm not leaving, she snapped. This is my home, and I have every right to be here. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police. Nathaniel couldn't stop himself from laughing. Go ahead, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. Call the cops. I have all the documents to prove that this is my house. He turned to Marcus, who had been standing silently by the door, watching the unfolding drama with a mixture of amusement and concern. Marcus, can you believe this? He asked, gesturing towards the woman. She's calling me the criminal. Marcus shook his head, his eyes wide with disbelief. This is insane, Nate, he said. Absolutely insane. Nathaniel turned back to the woman, a grim smile on his face. Go ahead and call the police, he repeated. I'll be waiting for them. And to his astonishment, she did. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, launching into a tearful and elaborate story about how Nathaniel had broken into her house and was threatening her safety. Nathaniel couldn't believe what was happening. This was his house, his dream, his future. And it was all being threatened by a woman who believed she had a spiritual claim to his property. 10 minutes later, the unmistakable wail of police sirens pierced the morning air. 2 patrol cars pulled up in front of the Craftsman, their flashing lights casting an unsettling glow on the already bizarre scene. Nathaniel stepped outside to meet the officers, his heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and indignation. He could see Karen, robe-clad and tearful, standing on the porch, gesticulating wildly as she pointed in his direction. The officers looked thoroughly confused, their faces etched with a mixture of skepticism and weariness. As Nathaniel approached, he could hear Karen's voice, amplified by the open air, painting him as a villain. He broke in while I was showering, she wailed, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. He's threatening me. He's trying to steal my home. The officers exchanged glances, their confusion deepening. One of them, a young woman with a no-nonsense expression, approached Nathaniel. Sir, can you tell me what's going on here? She asked, her voice calm but firm. Nathaniel took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. He knew that first impressions were crucial, and he wanted to present himself as a rational and credible homeowner, not a crazed intruder. "Officer, my name is Nathaniel Price, and I'm the owner of this property," he explained, carefully choosing his words. "I bought it at a foreclosure auction a couple of months ago. I came here today to move in, and I found this woman living inside. She's claiming that she has a right to be here, but she doesn't have any legal basis for her claim." He gestured towards Karen, who was still sobbing dramatically on the porch. "She's accusing me of breaking in, but I have all the documents to prove that I'm the rightful owner." The officer nodded slowly, her expression still guarded. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification and any paperwork you have to support your claim." Nathaniel readily complied, producing his driver's license, the deed to the house, the closing documents, and the tax records. He even called his realtor, Sarah, who was thankfully available to speak on speakerphone and confirm his ownership. While Nathaniel was presenting his case to the officer, Karen was inside the house, waving around a printed Wikipedia article about squatters' rights as if it were the Constitution itself. The other officer, a middle-aged man with a weary demeanor, seemed utterly bewildered by her antics. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and explain what's going on here," he said, his voice laced with a hint of exasperation. Karen, however, was in full performance mode, launching into a rambling and incoherent explanation about common law possession, spiritual inheritance, and the injustice of the foreclosure system. Nathaniel could hear snippets of her diatribe, drifting out of the open windows, making him cringe with embarrassment. Sarah, his realtor, was listening intently on the phone, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "This is unbelievable, Nate," she said. "She's trying to pull a fast one. Don't worry, we'll get this sorted out." As the officers continued to question them separately, Nathaniel felt a glimmer of hope. The officers, despite their initial confusion, seemed to be taking his claims seriously. They were carefully examining his documents, listening to his explanation, and observing Karen's increasingly erratic behavior. However, just when he thought the situation was starting to turn in his favor, the officer informed him that Karen had filed a fraudulent tenant affidavit 2 weeks earlier. According to his officer, Karen had claimed that she was a long-term occupant of the property, and had even produced a fake rental agreement with her name listed as the leaseholder. Nathaniel was stunned. How could she have gotten away with this? The fraudulent affidavit bought her some legal stalling time. Nathaniel felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He couldn't believe that Karen had managed to manipulate the legal system, even temporarily, to support her baseless claim. The tenant affidavit, though clearly fraudulent, had bought her valuable time, creating a legal roadblock that threatened to derail his plans and prolong his ordeal. He realized that this was no longer just a matter of convincing the police that he was the rightful owner. He had to actively fight against Karen's calculated attempts to undermine his legal rights. He was frustrated and was starting to lose his temper. He had to make them see that this woman was committing a crime and deserved jail time. The officer, sensing Nathaniel's frustration, explained that the county court would need to review the affidavit and determine its validity. In the meantime, the police were hesitant to take any immediate action, as they didn't want to be accused of violating Karen's purported tenant rights. Nathaniel felt trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare, his dream home held hostage by a woman who had no legal claim to it. He knew he had to act quickly and decisively to expose Karen's lies and reclaim his property. He asked the officer what he could do to expedite the process and prove that the affidavit was fraudulent. The officer suggested that he gather any evidence that could contradict Karen's claims, such as utility bills in his name, witness statements from neighbors, or any documentation proving that he had purchased the house before Karen filed the affidavit. Nathaniel immediately sprang into action. He called his cousin Marcus, who had been waiting patiently in the U-Haul, and asked him to start unloading some of his belongings to demonstrate his intention to occupy the house. He also contacted his realtor, Sarah, and asked her to provide any additional documentation that could support his ownership claim. Sarah, who was furious about the situation, promised to do everything she could to help. She even offered to contact the previous owner of the house, hoping that they could provide a statement confirming that Karen had never been a tenant or occupant of the property. While Nathaniel was scrambling to gather evidence, he remembered that he had installed a Ring doorbell camera a few weeks before the move-in date. He quickly accessed the Ring app on his phone and reviewed the footage. To his astonishment, he found several recordings of Karen retrieving his mail from the mailbox, including packages addressed to him and legal notices related to the property. This was irrefutable evidence of Karen's fraudulent activity, as it clearly demonstrated that she was aware that he was the owner of the house and that she was intentionally interfering with his property rights. He immediately showed the ring footage to the officer, who was visibly impressed. "This is very helpful, sir," the officer said. "This could be the evidence we need to take action." The officer radioed his supervisor and explained the situation, including the new evidence of Karen's mail theft. After a brief consultation, the supervisor instructed the officers to detain Karen for further questioning. More police units arrived on the scene, their presence adding to the already chaotic atmosphere. A detective arrived and began interviewing Nathaniel and Karen separately, delving deeper into the details of their conflicting claims. Nathaniel presented all his evidence, including the deed, the closing documents, the tax records, the ring footage, and the realtor's testimony. He also emphasized Karen's suspicious behavior and her previous attempts to file fraudulent paperwork. As the detective meticulously reviewed the evidence, a clearer picture began to emerge. Karen's carefully constructed facade of legitimacy began to crumble under the weight of Nathaniel's irrefutable proof. The detective discovered that Karen wasn't just a squatter trying to take advantage of a vacant property. She was, in fact, a serial squatter with a history of similar scams. She had done this 3 times before, moving into foreclosed or vacant houses, filing fraudulent paperwork, and exploiting loopholes in the legal system to live rent-free for months. She had perfected the art of playing the victim, using emotional manipulation and false accusations to deflect suspicion and evade prosecution. But this time, she had made a fatal mistake. She had targeted someone who was prepared to fight back. Nathaniel's diligence in gathering evidence, his calm and rational demeanor, and his unwavering determination to reclaim his property had exposed Karen's lies and brought her criminal activities to light. The detective also discovered that there were 2 open cases against Karen in other counties, related to her previous squatting schemes. She had been skipping court appearances, actively evading justice. This time, however, her luck had run out. The detective placed Karen under arrest, charging her with filing false legal documents, criminal trespassing, identity fraud, mail theft, obstruction of justice, and failure to appear in court in 2 counties. As the officers placed Karen in handcuffs and led her away, she unleashed a torrent of accusations and insults, screaming to the neighbors that Nathaniel was a scam artist, that he had forged the deed, and that big real estate was trying to erase her existence. One of the neighbors, a young woman with a smartphone, filmed the entire spectacle, capturing Karen's frantic outburst and the arrival of the police cars. The arrest scene was highly dramatic. It was quite sensational. Karen was being taken away, but she was still yelling and screaming. The scene was captured on film. Most of the neighbors turned their heads to watch the situation unfold. Nathaniel stood on his porch, watching Karen being driven away in a police car. He felt a sense of relief, but also a lingering unease. He knew that this was just the beginning of a long legal battle, but he was confident that he would ultimately prevail. He had the law on his side, the evidence to support his claim, and the unwavering support of his realtor and his cousin. He was finally free of Karen the squatter. He would finally get his peace and get to work on the dream music studio he wanted. His life can resume normally. The video of Karen's arrest went viral within hours, spreading like wildfire across social media and capturing the attention of local news outlets. The headline of the local news went viral: "Serial squatter exposed. Woman arrested after trying to evict new homeowner from his own house." Nathaniel agreed to do a full interview for local TV, standing on his new porch, holding the keys Karen had claimed weren't his. He recounted his experience, emphasizing the importance of knowing your rights as a homeowner and being prepared to fight against injustice. He also expressed his gratitude to the police officers who had handled the situation with professionalism and diligence, and to his realtor and cousin for their unwavering support. The interview was a resounding success, portraying Nathaniel as a victim of a brazen scam and highlighting the flaws in the system that allowed squatters to exploit legal loopholes. The public response to the story was overwhelmingly supportive. People from all walks of life reached out to Nathaniel, offering words of encouragement and sharing their own experiences with squatters and property disputes. He became a symbol of hope for homeowners who had been victimized by similar schemes, and he became a subject in many local media outlets. Some news outlets wanted to do a full investigative piece, Karen became infamous online, and many media outlets also interviewed her background and what she was all about. Meanwhile, Karen was facing a slew of criminal charges and a mountain of legal troubles. She was denied bail and was awaiting trial in a local jail. She was facing years in prison if convicted on all charges. Her days of squatting and scamming were finally over. Nathaniel, on the other hand, was finally able to focus on his dream. With Karen out of the picture, he secured full possession of his Craftsman home, changed the locks, and installed a new security system. He and his cousin Marcus burned the cursed couch in the backyard, symbolically purging the house of Karen's negative energy. He began the process of renovating the finished basement into his dream music studio. He soundproofed the walls, installed professional recording equipment, and created a comfortable and inspiring space where he could finally unleash his creativity without compromise. He wrote a song about his experience with Karen, a cathartic anthem that celebrated the triumph of justice and the resilience of the human spirit. The song became a local hit, resonating with listeners who had faced their own challenges and overcome adversity. Nathaniel's music career began to flourish, and he was finally living the life he had always dreamed of. He never forgot the ordeal he had endured, but he used it as a source of inspiration and a reminder of the importance of standing up for his rights and fighting for what he believed in. The story of Nathaniel Price and Karen the Squatter became a cautionary tale, a reminder that justice, while sometimes delayed, ultimately prevails. And Nathaniel finally had his peace and was able to create his dream music studio.